Hello, innovators. I am Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator. Today I'm talking with Aman Agarwal. He is an engineer whose work has ranged from building self-driving cars to Silicon Valley AI and AI-powered brain computer interfaces. That's a whole little mouthful right there. I stole this little section of your profile. It's like, this is a great way to explain what he's doing. You've also been a business executive at two companies valued at 1 billion each, which is super impressive in its own right, in addition to all the other areas that you exemplify. And
Thank
so
you.
these days, now you're a founder and president of SANPRAM Transnational, an executive education company that helps business leaders and entrepreneurs survive and thrive in the future where we will be driven with AI and new digital technologies. Thank you for being on the Polymath podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Dustin.
So this is a show by PolyInnovator, so please say hello to the innovators in the audience.
Well, hello everyone, and glad to see there's a little space for more polymaths, people who are interested in a lot of different stuff, and happy to be part of this community.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to the Polymath Polycast. And so one thing I like to break the ice with is to have you share something about yourself that no one knows about you.
Ooh, that no one knows about me. That would be hard to find because, there's definitely like several aspects of my life, right? That one or two people know about and nobody except for them. I guess one thing that most people wouldn't know about me, I'm totally anti-dating apps.
No Tinder, no Bumble.
Yeah, no Bumble, no Tinders, um, and uh, and this is like definitely not the direction we want to go this conversation in. But I just spent like 1 minute
Yeah.
talking about why when I got started into dating and the whole that thing, I quickly realized that the best way to have choice in your relationships with the opposite sex, people you find attractive, is to, approach them in person.
Mhm.
Whether it's in the grocery store or in the library or whatever stuff you like to do, right? And Being on a dating app is like being in a marketplace where you let the economics of that market dictate what you get,
Mhm.
for the most part. But if you're a, so to speak, door-to-door salesman, you can choose which customers you you
Yeah.
knock on.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, and it's like not trusting the algorithm, but trusting your own gut more.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's much harder. It's much harder. Let me tell you. Like if you
I
see a
know.
cute girl in a grocery store and you want to talk, like, uh,
Well, nowadays you got to stay 6 feet too. So,
yeah.
so moving to something else I kind of asked too at the beginning is what was your mindset 5 years ago, and how has it changed since then?
So 5 years ago, that would be 2015. So I remember in 2015, I had just got back from China around June. Um, and at this point, this is like November now. So I had just started working for my first company. I was doing in sales,
Mhm.
and I remember I had applied to probably 100 different kinds of jobs, trying to figure out what I wanted to do in the first place because I had just graduated from college in 2015. So it was a very feeling of like lost, like, oh, what am I gonna do? What am
Where
I
do I
good
go?
at?
Yeah.
Yeah, where do I go? I want to be useful and I want to make money as well. I want to do something enjoyable, like all that millennial stuff that, we,
Inherently have
yeah,
somehow we
yeah,
all have.
yeah. So that was going on in my head, and it would also like one more thing was what do I want to be good at? And at that point, I was like, I should get good at sales because if I'm good at this, then afterwards, whatever else I pick up, it's always going to be a useful skill. Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me to some of the first question here, then talking about skills and being non-technical as well. How can people from
Mhm.
all over thrive in the AI and tech-driven or centric landscape as a non-technical person?
Yeah, that's a loaded question.
Yeah.
It's like there's many different aspects to it, but I think the main is being able to communicate with experts and being intentional. there's being intentional as in like you have a goal of where do you want to go, right? It may not be a concrete goal, but it's like a direction of where you want to go. And then the world around you will keep changing, so there's always going to be experts in the fields which, and you want to, benefit from the
Yeah.
experts, and you want to be able to communicate with them, build bonds with them. And so focusing on that communication with experts, and it's really not about becoming an expert yourself in every single thing, because that, I mean, even though you may be a polymath or you may be super interested in everything, you cannot become an expert in every single thing. It's
Or
just
something
not
like,
possible.
yeah, that would be called an omnimath. In fact, I've talked about that a little bit where literal, if you had unlimited time, then you could be an omnimath expert in
Uh-huh.
everything. And
Yeah.
back in the old days, yeah, but yeah, we'll get back to that later.
Yeah, the so there are two tools that I to advocate that everybody can pick up for communicating with experts. Is one is called forced empathy, and that is when you're having a conversation which is a difficult conversation with an expert where you're totally not on the same page. And this is more when you have a certain authority on that person. Like if you're a manager, an executive, okay, and like a startup co-founder, and you're working with an engineer
Hmm.
or a firm that you've hired, right? Whatever expert you've hired, and it's like you need to explain, since you're both living in different realities. You think you want this done, and they're like, this is not possible, this is not realistic, this is what's practical. And so the onus is on you as the non-technical expert, as a non-expert, I mean,
Hmm.
to be able to explain your point of view to them with the from the position that this is a problem that we both need to solve. And so help me figure out what's possible and what's not, given that this is the problem. This is the common enemy for both of us.
Finding that
And that's what,
bridge.
yeah, that's what I call forced empathy, because it forces the your counterpart to say, okay, well, I mean, this he's not trying to antagonize me, and I need to, like, now that I'm aware of his perspective, I need to give a solution
Hmm.
instead of making excuses, right? So you flip them over from, you know, I can't help you, to, wait, how do I help you?
Well, and it's interesting too, because some of you mentioned that about the polymaths there not being able to master everything. Back in the old days, like Leonardo da Vinci's days, mastering
Hmm.
everything was a lot more possible. I mean, granted, it still wasn't really viable, but like people actually, scientists weren't evolved enough yet to really have
Hmm.
like much of a deep specialty. And it's interesting because Peter Thiel actually said that polymathy is dead because you can't master everything anymore. And that's not the whole point of polymathy. Polymathy is the point to have multiple different expert level skills, not necessarily
Yep.
jack of all trades, but expert level. But the interesting
Hmm.
thing is what you mentioned there is the transferable knowledge and be able to communicate with people. And it made me think of Bill Gates because he is a polymath in this case. He does a lot of different things. He self teaches himself almost to an expert level in many different
Hmm.
areas. And so when he's trying to solve these global problems, he'll surround himself with experts and people
Hmm.
who know more than him. So he's the dumbest
Hmm.
person in the room, but Bill Gates. And so it's interesting
Yep.
how he's able to go toe to toe with these experts, but then he learns from the differences of the knowledge dissonance.
Yeah, and he reads like 100 books a year, right?
Yeah.
At least 100 books a year, from like all different fields. From he reads about, I once saw a documentary about him, and they had like one frame, like a few frames where they where the frame contained the books that he was reading at that time. And it was like he had a book on transcendental meditation. He had a book on, on cancer, I think, and like a bunch of other different things. And I was like, wow, okay, so he reads books about meditation and stuff that I read as well, and a lot more. Like, so you never even know. Like, you would imagine Bill Gates not knowing enough about a certain domain, but you may be surprised.
Yeah. I hope I can be like that because if you look at the bookshelf there's economics, there's
Hmm.
the Tao of physics, there's philosophy, there's neuroscience, and all those different kind of things. And so going to these different kind of fields is always really interesting. Moving on to the kind of this next question here, then too, creating a global education company, actually something we're both doing, but something you've actually been quite successful with, it seems like, is like your SANPRAM, takes a lot of efforts. So what do you hope to achieve from sending it out to the world?
Well, yeah. So the main thing that I wanted to achieve was that, hey, like I realized that, when choosing what I want to do,
Hmm.
or like what projects I want to work on, the first thing is it needs to be something um, that I can bring some value to, right? So something that's innately special about me, or like a childhood dream, or like a special gift that I may have,
Hmm.
a special talent, whatever. What does this give me a way to express what I have, right? Express myself. And so teaching is something I've always been a nerd about. I've always loved like how people learn and how people teach effectively. And so I've probably spent thousands of hours just thinking about how to teach effectively. Um, and so starting an education company was a way for me to make money doing something that I am good at,
Hmm.
like something I can keep learning, keep doing. So that was one thing. And then I also feel like there's a huge gap in education always, because as the world is changing, there's new demands for what people need to learn to thrive in the future. And I felt like I can find that little niche in this gap and fill that and serve a few people,
Yeah.
um, make the world a better place, quote unquote, um, while realizing my own aspirations. So yeah,
Yeah.
there was no real like huge mission driven um, you know vision like in the beginning, like I'm going to create the world's greatest education company, although that is part of it. Like I would love to create the world's greatest education company.
Right.
And sometimes I do, in my journal I do write that just to remind myself that
That macro
it
view.
needs to be the very best. Yeah, it
Yeah.
needs to be the very best at, like there should be no other person teaching people to be technically fluent better than I do it, right?
Hmm.
That's so that's definitely the greatest in that manner, in that way. But in general, it's just like, what can I do best?
It is interesting too because I spent a lot of time with learning management systems, and I've not been satisfied with hardly any of them. And it's like,
Uh,
how can we teach people in the online presence and
mhm.
ecosystem, so to speak, without diluting content, without being too linear like MOOCs and stuff like that? And so that might be something we can go on a tangent about here in a bit too. What
Yep.
have you learned from creating SANPRAM?
What have I learned? Well, a lot of stuff, but I think the main. So the nature of SANPRAM is that it's literally a one-person company. The only full-time permanent employee of the company is myself, and everybody else who helps me, they're not really like committed like, full-time to SANPRAM, and they help, and they also have other stuff to do, on their own time. And so I am the company in a way, right? Although I don't do everything myself. And so with that, the my routine, my personal routine and my psychology on a day-to-day basis,
Mm-hmm.
decides what the company does as well, right? So the company lives or dies based on whether I'm motivated to keep working or if I'm slacking off watching a Netflix like TV series, right? And so it's sometimes difficult to be mindful that, hey, okay, I do have my own life. Like I am watching this, let's say a TV show or whatever, and I have other things to do. But at the same time, I need to be very mindful that I'm also the president of a company, which is an entity in itself. It's like a baby.
Yeah.
And if I'm the only parent for that baby, then my routine and my schedule, like, and my decisions on a micro level really have a lot of sway.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, the goal is to reduce that, reduce the individual impact that I have on the company as much as possible, like where other people can,
So you're not the
actually manage it
bottleneck.
for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I need to remove myself and fire myself from as many tasks as possible.
Well, it's interesting because literally just earlier today when I was recording an interview with someone else, we were talking about how delegation is important and polymaths are going to want to do all those different things. Entrepreneurs wear all these different hats, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And I think that polymaths can do that. They can go in like, hey, learn everything about marketing, everything about the back end, the front end.
Yep.
But there comes a time where you do need to delegate. And because is your time actually worth doing the back end if you're not a back end engineer when you could be focusing on making content or courses?
Yep,
I'm
totally
facing the
agree. And
problem here too.
it's also it's also hard to like I have a few management like tendencies.
Hmm.
Um, although I and maybe part of why I'm a teacher is because I like to tell people what to do.
Yeah.
It may be part of the reason. So it's also hard to like make sure that whoa, you can trust the person. Like, hey, okay, do it yourself. So I've been actually training myself to give people more freedom than even they're used to,
Hmm.
and get myself used to giving people freedom and them having freedom.
Yeah. That's good. It's a nice exploration for your expanding horizon, so to speak. And
Mhm.
your website for it says the world's first advanced technical fluency program. And you've said that once before already in the episode today. What does that mean, so to speak?
Yeah, so technical fluency means being able to work on high level technical problems in a given domain
Hmm.
and have intelligent conversations with experts, being able to guide them, being able to manage them, make strategic decisions without becoming an expert yourself, without necessarily being an expert yourself,
Hmm.
right? And I like to use the example of building a house. If you're a homeowner and you're, hiring an architect and a contractor and other people to help you build the house that you want to be living in, you do not need to be an expert in architecture or an expert in, how to get a construction project going. But however, if you walk into a meeting with your architect and the first time you just tell them like, hey, I need a place to poop, I need a place to sleep, I need a place to cook,
Hmm.
and by the way, I also want a 50-foot water park in my attic. Like,
Yeah.
so let's roll with this. If you start, if you the architect's reaction to you would be like, either it's going to be like, wow, let's have fun, or it's going to be like, thank you for your time. I don't think I'm the right person to work with you on this project, right?
Right.
Because you have literally no idea what building a house is about.
Yeah.
On the other hand, technical fluency would mean you know what a house is, right?
Hmm.
You know how a house is built. There's a foundation, there's like other stuff. There's different ways to build a house, and there's like some things the architect needs from you. You need to tell them how many rooms you need, how many people the house is for, what kind of kitchen you need,
Yeah.
other stuff. You want to be able to guide the experts. You want to be able to manage the experts. You can tell the contractor, like, I don't want to import marble from Italy because I know that I don't need it, right?
Yeah.
Um, and not be, just scammed or whatever. But there's like, you can, and you can always be more technically fluent than you need, but you can never be like too fluent, right? The more you know, the better it is for you
Yeah.
to while managing.
Well, it's just not enough to be able to hold a conversation and be able to learn that areas of knowledge terminology. So, for example, I got hit by some car one recently, not recently, this earlier this year, at the beginning of the year, some car hit my car. And so I had to talk to the insurance company. And
Mm,
beforehand, I spent hours learning the tone and not tone, but like the terminology and the mindset behind a lot of insurance companies uh, readings. So learning about the
yep.
duty of care and establishing that and using those words and terminology in my statements. And because of
Yep.
that, I'm pretty sure I won the case because of that understanding of the area.
Ah,
And it's interesting because
ah,
I knew I was in the right no matter what, but it was just interesting
yeah.
how that particular communication was able to
Mhm.
help progress further.
Yep. Yep. That's a good point, man. Yep.
So, how have you been feeling while building a business?
Well, it's slow, of
Hmm.
course, because again, it's a new category of programs because nothing else exists for this very purpose. There's like 1.5 million programming classes and programming courses,
Right.
but there's nothing really to help an executive get the point. Like, okay, this is how technology works, and this is how these are the different moving parts, and like the top-down view, so to speak,
Hmm.
without having to drag them along a programming class. And so it's you know f- there's a big aspect of promotion, like getting the message out, writing a book, writing blog posts, talking about it on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
just spreading awareness and creating that marketing gravity so that eventually you build a big enough, like, you could call it a critical mass of promotion, and then suddenly people suddenly start to notice, like, wow, okay, this person does this thing,
Hmm.
and I should check it out. That's just like building that promotion, critical mass
Hmm.
is about the daily reps, the daily repetition, the daily discipline of, spending those hours doing it and not expecting a result too
Right away.
quickly.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about that consistent daily habit, that 1% better each day. And just because I even had a little sub thing there is like what that question is like, I'm always constantly putting out fires and progress. You may not be able to see if you put out that fire, you may not be able to see what happens till the next day. If you change
Mhm.
the name servers on your website, because that was a problem that your website was facing, you're not going to see that till like the next day anyways. So you're putting out that
Mhm.
fire, you're making progress, but you have to be patient to see the results.
Yeah, but on that note, like, I actually don't like the 1% better every day thing.
Hmm.
I actually find I think it's much more demoralizing than it is motivating. Because although mathematically you say, like, yeah, 1% better, and then over the year you're like 40 times, 50 times better, whatever, right?
Hmm.
But I think progress. So it's good to not. And wait, let me step back. So the way I see it is process over progress over perfection. And by that I mean, the first hurdle that most people get over is perfection. Like, okay, I don't need to be perfect. I don't need six-pack abs right now. Um, but then the next thing that they often fall into is the 1% better trap, which is like, I've been working out for 5 days. I'm not, you know, that,
Five
like,
percent better.
7,
Yeah.
8%, 8% better. I'm not better than yesterday. Why? Like, I'm not feeling the progress. I'm not
Mhm.
feeling the improvement in my skill, even though I've been, training for 3 weeks. Or I haven't lost, like, if I'm supposed to lose 5 pounds within 6 months, why have I not lost my first pound within the first month, right?
It's more exponential
Um,
than that, where it doesn't
yeah,
happen
yeah,
for a
yeah,
while. Yeah.
yeah. It doesn't happen for the while, and then it slowly collects, and then suddenly you see bigger changes, right? And so what I like to focus on is the process, and the process is, again, the daily reps. It's
Hmm.
like, what is the thing that you can completely control on
Yeah.
this day? If you're a baseball player, it may be like, I'm going to go to the nets and swing my bat 50 times, and I don't care how bad it is, but I'm going to try my best, or whatever my best is on that day, to swing that bat 50 times. And, over time, if I do it again and again, and I'm enjoying the process, that's how it's like the journey
Hmm.
becomes its own reward. Because,
Well, and I think a
yeah.
lot of people do see that 1% as that just practice, not necessarily progression. People
Hmm.
people want to do it because of the progression, but they understand it as the process, I think. And for most people's
Hmm.
cases, Atomic Habits is a great book on that. And they talk
Yep.
about that 1% every day doesn't lead to 365%, it leads to 37%, which is how mathematically goes into, like you mentioned earlier. But it is interesting how 37% is not that much if you think about it. But if you can get a third of your life change or whatever process you're trying to change, skill or business, whatnot, a third of it every year, that's a lot of progress in 1 year. People underestimate what they can do in 10 years, let alone in one. So, yeah.
Oh yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
So, as a fellow blogger, too, I find it interesting to see how the domain has evolved over the years. So, what has
Hmm.
been your writing journey?
Personally, haven't been following how, blogging itself has been changing. I mean, I do see, like, the rise of social media and these microblogging platforms and social media and whatnot. But for me, I think blogging was I started writing a blog 2016
Mm-hmm.
ish. Yeah, 2016. And it was just sharing knowledge. Like, it was just doing what I do best, which is teaching. And it was just like, okay, what do I know well,
Mm-hmm.
and is there somebody in the world that knows that thing less than I do, that I could teach them, right? And so I started writing, like, about how do you outsource a software project, how do you find a job straight out of college, and then slowly it was like programming tutorials, and then just sharing my thoughts on, like, different different topics that I was really into. Um, and I was initially writing for an audience of five. I was like, if five people ever find this and you think this is really valuable, good job. Like
Hmm.
I had fun writing it, and five people, like
Had
that's
fun
an
reading it.
exponential. That's exponential
Yeah.
growth. And it worked for a while, and then again you optimize for five, and then it goes viral once in a while, and so you're like, wow, a lot of people like this. But blogging for me is like I write one long post, 5,000, 6,000 words once in a while, and I spend 3 weeks, sometimes even 4 weeks on it,
Mm.
um, and getting it, reviewed by five different people before I publish and so forth. Because I see it as a way of me creating art. It's something that I'm passionate about
Yeah.
improving, doing really, really well. Because that's the goal. The goal for me with blogging is expressing myself.
Right.
And so I'm not really trying to put out a lot of content hoping that over time I get traction, because traction is not the goal at all. It's more about me doing my best. With my company, again, with the course and with the product, like there, I do need traction. So
Yeah.
it's like a different kind of approach.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of those things too, where whether it's companies or personal brands or the
Yeah.
hybrid ones of those, it is interesting how your methodology and necessities change. And it's one thing that I found unique, which we talked about on your site as well, is the idea of a codex. And
Mm.
at the beginning of quarantine, I actually started a daily writing habit, which I've done a few times over the past decade or so, but it didn't last super long. And I think that this is leading to the next question here. It did
Mhm.
show me that was beneficial. Have you tried a daily routine?
For writing?
Just to kind of get that expressive thought processes out.
Oh man. Yeah, I have. It's the one thing I'm struggling with right now because I'm writing a book.
Hmm.
And yeah, it is the most difficult and the most, like, the highest ROI activity that you can invest into is building a routine
Hmm.
for writing. I think having a routine is just everything. I think all the great. So I've been reading up on how the most prolific, the most successful writers and creators of all time have been, like how they handle their own routines, and it's always about that daily habit of, okay, how many words or how many hours they sit down and yeah, one guy once said that, writing is easy. You just sit down at a typewriter and bleed.
Yeah.
um, and so some people like interpret that as writing your heart out, or writing with your soul. But for me, it always sounds like, wow, it actually feels like you have to force yourself to sit down
Hmm.
and write
It's
and just
always
stare.
starting that's hardest,
Yep, absolutely.
not the actual writing part. It's just starting, and that's actually why I did it too. Because my main series, not these interviews, but the main series, the Omni content, it's a multi-format show where I start with a blog, I make that into a slideshow, make that into a video, then I make it to a polycast,
Hmm.
and in order to do that whole process, it's not that hard. I can do it in a day. It's great. But you have to start with the blog post. You
Yep,
have to
yep.
start writing. And that's my problem where it's like, I mean, I've had other issues like getting the right amount of tools and automation and stuff like that. But just getting that habit of starting that hot writing is part of the problem. Yeah.
Yep, the blank canvas, the blank page is equally exciting as it is frightening.
Hmm. So that whole idea of the daily writing habit, I formed that into what I call the fireside blog. And I bring this up because it kind of acts like a bullet journal, like you said, kind of bleeding the heart out, or a daily idea expression, like we talked about too, much like your Codex idea on your site. And so when I came across you, I really resonated with that Codex and actually stole the idea too and made my own, the fireside Codex, as I call it. And I'm hoping to have it kind of like my Leonardo da Vinci journal or notebooks. Like people see that and like, wow, that's cool. So do you have
Mhm.
any
Yep.
advice for someone like me or someone listening in to create their own codex?
Yeah, so a codex, again, for those not familiar, is a manuscript in text form, a notebook where you just scribble your stuff while you're studying or working or whatever. So it's your personal notes. So a codex, for those not familiar, is a manuscript or a notebook that you use for your personal work or leisure or whatever. So it's just not meant to be shared with anyone. It's just for your own reference, your own note-taking exercise, right? And so you need to, if you're starting a codex online, like I have, it's it's the important element is to differentiate that from a blog, because a blog is something that you write for others to read. A blog has an audience, and for a codex, the only audience is yourself.
Hmm.
And so if you so and I did fall into this trap in the beginning because I started writing my codex and then I had the urge to share them online on LinkedIn and all my friends, like, hey, this is like what I've been thinking about. And so after that, once I started sharing them, I also started feeling like, oh, maybe I should clean this up a little bit. Maybe I should make this more reader friendly.
Mm.
Um, and that's when it became more of a chore. Like, oh my God, it became like writing a blog post instead of being used as a notebook,
Hmm.
right? And that's something that you would best avoid because you don't want to turn it into a blogging habit if that's not your goal, right? If your goal is to have a following, build an audience, then go do that. Like that's great. But I would say be clear in your own head about what you're trying to get out of the codex.
Hmm.
Are you trying to think out loud and just like be able to document your thought process while going around your life and your career,
Hmm.
or are you using that to share your ideas with others?
Yeah. I think for me, it's a little bit of both. Where I do want to share my
Mhm.
ideas, like I said, I want it to be kind of like the Leonardo da Vinci notebooks, where that could have benefited the world greatly had they been out there. But it is more meant for me, more meant for, like you said, reference. Like, hey, what did I think about at this time, and like, where did that idea come from? And go back to that old Codex piece and see it. And so I don't really
Yep.
worry too much about formatting, but I do think that's a good distinction to make. Like, I know what I want, but someone listening in might
Yep.
be like, I want a Codex, but they really want a
Hmm.
blog or something like that.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So it actually kind of makes me think of things like Rome Research or Coda, or my favorite tool that I'm actually looking at right now for our notes, Notion.
Yep.
And so
Hmm.
they help you create a second brain, like as they say in Silicon Valley, helping you keep track of your ideas and projects. And so it's interesting how it does seem quite similar to a codex. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it is. I mean, you could use a notebook. You could use like the tool. The the key is the concept of a
Mhm.
codex, right? Where you're taking notes as you go about learning and going through life. And again, all of these tools are really great. I use Evernote and I use Workflowy as well. And I also tend to publish a lot of my thoughts on my codex. So my codex actually is in the form of a blog. Technically, it's a blog, but I use that to just think out loud.
Mhm.
And you could literally use any platform whatsoever.
Well, and I wasn't really worried about platforms per se. It was more about what those platforms could do, more so than a
Hmm.
blog would. Because, like Rome Research, for example, has connections. So if you tag an
Yep.
idea or codex, you can have it, for those who don't know, listening in, it can reference to another codex entry.
Hmm.
And so if you had a codex entry on blogging, and then a year ago you had entered another entry, it's like, hey, this was a really cool post on how to blog, then
Yep.
it'll make that connection and show you and connect it together. That's why I thought it might be
Hmm.
useful.
Yep. That makes sense.
Okay. Well, and I'll move on from there then. I just thought it might be interesting seeing your opinion on that. So, when it comes to any skill, there is often transferable knowledge between them. And so, what is the common ground that leads to innovations? Like, do you think where do you see the intersection, I guess, then of here? Let me start over because I didn't answer that question very well. So when it comes to any skill, there's often transferable knowledge between them, and so there's that is that common ground that leads to innovation. So where do you see the intersection of different domains occurring in your life?
For me, it's filmmaking and storytelling are huge influences
Hmm.
on teaching. For example, I borrow a lot of concepts from the way filmmakers hold an audience member
Hmm.
in the palm of their hand, and they guide them through a story, through a new universe in many cases, getting the audience member comfortable in the universe that you're trying to surround them with. And that for me was really powerful. Like, how do so for me, teaching a new concept is also like you're taking somebody into an unfamiliar place
Hmm.
and you're trying to make that place more and more familiar to them, right? and they shouldn't feel at any given point that they're in an uncomfortable place, because that's when they dissociate and they stop learning, and there's a break in the chain, and you have to start over, right? Which is what happens with most of the stuff that we learn in school, where you learn it for a while
Mm-hmm.
and you become somewhat familiar with it, but you don't have context. It's still an unfamiliar place that you can live in for a certain while you're passing your exams or whatever, and then once you're done, you forget all of it, pretty
Yeah, so
much. Because
retention.
I barely remember all the weird stuff I learned in school. But the key with a story is that you start out in a comfortable place.
Mm-hmm.
So let me take an example. Have you ever walked into a movie midway?
I
A,
have
a
actually.
really exciting movie. A
Yeah,
really exciting movie. Have you walked in midway?
I guess so. Like getting a drink, coming back, or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Like so, if you ever start watching a movie from the middle, no matter how highly rated the movie is or whatever, it's hard to enjoy it, right? As it goes, you may start to enjoy it after a while if you as you wrap your head around what it is, and like, okay, what this is what's going on. But it's a painful journey, and in many cases, that's for a movie, which is actually interesting. But
Yeah.
if you're learning a new concept, that's just totally bollocks. You're just gonna quit midway, and you're gonna be like, okay, I don't, let me just learn something else.
You didn't get hooked.
Yeah, you didn't get hooked, right? And so the difference is, if you had a friend who pauses the movie and tells you in 5 minutes only what happened in the previous half of that movie, so that you have that context, like, okay, this is what's happening, and then he gives you a few more leads, like, okay, this person is doing that, and that person wants this, right? The movie, even if you still don't watch the first half, it becomes exponentially more enjoyable, because now you're in a familiar place and you can follow how the story is unfolding, right? And it's the same with learning a new concept. If I just parachute you into an unfamiliar place where you have no idea how you got there, then you won't learn. And which is why there's no such thing as explaining something simply,
Mm-hmm.
because simple doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is what you already know and where you need to go. And the purpose of a teacher is not to explain something simply, as if simplicity was something absolute. It's about bridging the gap, like taking you from what you already know to what you want to learn
Mm-hmm.
from me, right? Something that's simple for an eighth grader, maybe something that's not so simple for like a 10th grader, for example. Or and there's also like, what use are you going to make of that knowledge, of that concept, right? After a certain level of simplicity, the usefulness of that concept to the recipient starts to break down as well, right?
Right.
Which is why I don't really buy all the explain like I'm five kind of things, because okay, like, cool, you explain it to me like I'm five, but I didn't get anything useful from it.
Yeah. Makes
Does
sense. I
that
mean,
make
it's
sense?
one.
It was a lot
Yeah.
of rambling.
Well, it's one of those things too where it's a matter of translating the knowledge into something that someone else can understand. If you understand something really well, you don't need to be explaining this new concept at level 5. You just need to be able to explain the bridge between those areas.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So something we both agree on is that the world needs more polymaths, and so that leads me to ask then, what is a polymath to you?
Yeah, to me, a polymath is somebody who is curious about a lot of things, and they are a student of a lot of different things that they find interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, and we did talk about it in the beginning, but it's not really about being a jack of all trades. Also, although there's nothing wrong
Yeah.
about that, there's nothing bad about being a jack of all trades. I love being a jack of so many trades, right? But you have to be a student. Even if you don't become like really good at something, you have to see yourself as a student,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or even if you're, and Richard Feynman, for example, he had a lot of interests. Like, that
Yeah.
guy was a physicist or mathematician, whatever, but he played musical instruments, he did comedy, I don't know what else, like he did a lot of cool stuff.
Right. Yeah, so just being able to, like, and speaking of Feynman too, that goes back to explaining things simply, but not actually simply, but explaining things in a manner people can understand. Well, and this leads me to a next question then too. A quote from your personal site that I noticed is that I specialize in taking complex, bleeding edge technical subject matter, like self-driving cars or edge computing, and teaching it to complete newbies with no engineering backgrounds. And so
Hmm.
I even mentioned here in the notes here, like it sounds a lot like the Feynman technique, where you're able to explain
Hmm.
something very well to someone who doesn't know it well. So what are your thoughts on that since you've already brought it up too?
Yeah, it goes back to what level or what place do I assume the recipient of that knowledge already is,
Mm-hmm.
and that there's a lot of trial and error there, because I want to make sure that I'm assuming the right starting point for whoever I'm writing for or whoever I'm teaching. Um, so usually I'm biased towards, like, I overcorrect for someone more beginner than to assume that they know more than they do, because
Mm-hmm.
it's it's okay to bore the learner, like, hey, this is stuff I already know, this is too easy, and slowly they accelerate towards the level where, okay, now I'm learning stuff. But it's totally not okay if you start at too high a level and you can't hook the person in. So it's always, for me, it's always better to start at a place which is more beginner level.
Mm-hmm. So something that you mentioned in the pre-show is that you're getting stronger. And so what does that entail? Physically or mentally? What kind of thing?
Yeah, it is physically, and we could we could talk about this for hours as well. Because I'm also like really into physical fitness and how people develop their bodies for different purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I personally have a four-part framework that I like to call it about physical fitness and health. Is that I think there's like four levels to fitness, right? The first level is you're just unhealthy, like, and you know that if you stay like that, you're gonna die by 50, 60 years old, whatever, in the hospital with some chronic disease or diabetes or whatever, right? And people who are have that kind of lifestyle, they know who they are, right? In general.
Yeah.
Um, and then the next step is like long-term health, longevity, basically, where you're not you may not be super athletic, you may not be having six-pack abs or whatever, but like the people in Osaka in Japan, who are like, they eat healthy, they have a reasonably active lifestyle, and they know that unless they get unlucky, they're going to live up to 100 or whatever, right? With even very basic health care and a few shots once in a while, they're gonna be doing pretty well, and they're not gonna have any chronic problems until like which bother them throughout
Yeah.
their lifespan. And then the third level, and by the way, so from the first level to this next level, is just about fixing your habits.
Yeah.
If you just don't do stupid shit, and
Fix your process.
be more mindful about what you put in your mouth and how you go about your day, you can easily get to level two. And then level three is optimal optimal fitness for a lot of physical stuff, where you have, like, you can do like 10, 20 pull-ups, which is like considered one of the hallmarks of fitness. You're flexible, you have no aching pains in your body, you're very good mobility and flexibility, and so you can be in really good shape for a really long time, right? That is
Mm-hmm.
like the optimal experience of your body, like getting the most of this body that you have. And then the fourth level is niche athletic fitness, which at a world class performance level, right? There's like Olympian level in one specific thing where you may actually sacrifice longevity and
Yeah.
all round performance for 5, 10 years of really, really intense work and intense competitive advantages in a certain physical space, right?
Well,
If you're a weightlifter or whatever.
yeah. they say a lot of like runners, for example, Olympian runners will have a lot of issues with their like legs and their like as they get older, they get more arthritis, something like that, just because they've used up so much of the lubrication in the knees, for example, or they just have too much friction, stuff like that. So it is interesting, yeah.
Hmm.
I like the 4 levels there. I'm probably in the third one, but
Yeah,
still, like I was like, oh, maybe I'm fourth. No,
yeah,
I'm third.
yeah, exactly. And for me, I think for me the goal again is level three. Like right now, I'm like somewhere between level two and level three. Of course, I was fortunate to get to level two early because I realized that the path I was heading down was not the right one.
Mhm.
And just this clarity of like I don't need to be following Cristiano Ronaldo's workout routine or whatever Tom Brady does or whatever, because it's not for me, right?
Yeah.
For me is how do I first get my mobility up, making sure I have no problems, being able to do the stuff that I want to do on a daily basis
Mhm.
and not have any aches and pains, right? And be physically strong enough to participate in more sports,
Yeah.
right?
So that's cool. And kind of pivoting the topic here then too, because there's a lot of interesting techie stuff we can go into,
Mm.
is that you've been on the bleeding edge of so many autonomous systems. And so what are some prime examples of your history there?
I think the most bleeding edge thing was an algorithm to detect seizures in the brain in real
Mhm.
time. That was, I think, in grad school. That was 2018, 2000, early 2019, I think.
Mhm.
And yeah, that was a pretty cool project, using machine learning and uh, implant, like you have some chips that you implant into the brain. They collect data, like, some recordings in real time, and then you have a machine learning algorithm that detects whenever a spike occurs that is similar to a seizure spike.
Mhm.
And then you can send, and then similar to noise cancellation in headphones, you send the opposite pulse, which is negative to the spike you observe, and so you literally cancel out a seizure in the
Hmm.
brain in real time as soon as it comes up.
That's cool, and it's like like noise canceling headphones, like you say there, and it kind of is interesting how we're moving more towards this bionic and augmented body and mind systems, and so it kind of makes me think of like Deus Ex or Cyberpunk. Where do you see a lot of the new changes on the bleeding edge of technology when it comes to something like augmentation, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think the bleeding edge is always going to be in the healthcare space and not in the, I want to be cooler space.
Yeah, well, it's not about being cool; it's more about being able to do more.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But you get what I mean.
Yeah.
So I think healthcare, there's definitely a lot of promise in such applications. There's a lot of people who've already been doing this for so many years. There are people like they're being helped with being paralyzed, and they can move machinery and move artificial limbs
Hmm.
through the brain machine interfaces. And so that's been around for a while. And I think these things are getting better. And after they're good enough, eventually they'll also get cheaper.
Yeah.
And hopefully there'll be a time when everyone can access, like everyone can use large machinery, like in a Transformers robot, and be able to move heavy stuff around.
Well, and who knows? Maybe instead of having 4 levels of strength, there's a fifth one where it'll be augmented, where it's just
Yeah,
like the cybernetics all over.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So, still kind of in the whole idea of bleeding edge and that kind of thing. What is your opinion on the current self-driving automobile progress, so to speak?
It's been slow. It's been slower than people expected.
Hmm.
Back in 2015, a lot of people thought that in 10 years, nobody will be getting a driver's license. And there's a lot of a small part of that is also Silicon Valley ambition and optimism. Like we know what it's gonna happen, and it's gonna happen sooner than we think.
Hmm.
And the reality, of course, is that there's no self-driving car on the street yet. Uh, there's just the reason is that there are very few. There's almost no universally agreed upon way to test that a self-driving car is safe.
Mm.
And the difference with human drivers is that if a human driver makes a mistake, you can take him to jail, right? If a self-driving car makes a mistake, who's liable? Like, who's going to insure the car? Who made the mistake? And how do you test that the car will not make a mistake? Being crash proof, like being safe, keeping the passenger safe in the case of a crash is something that the automobile industry has been doing for 50, 60 years, right? But making sure that it won't get into a crash is a whole new domain that we haven't really thought
Yeah.
about enough. And so the biggest challenge with a lot of the, you know, literally every company that's building self-driving vehicles out there is how do you test your system? How do you prove that it is safe?
Hmm.
And the most promising manner or the most promising approach to constraint is to constrain the environment in which that vehicle will operate. So you have really specific conditions in which you will let that self-driving car move around, and as soon as it gets outside of those constraints, you stop the car and you let a human driver take over. That's like the approach that most people are following. It is the most logical approach, but then you need to make sure that that constrained environment is also it also overlaps with a market where you can make some money, right?
Yeah.
If you're solving a problem in a constrained environment, but nobody wants to pay you for solving that problem, then it's not really a problem worth solving. And so of course the most valuable market is where there's a lot of competition, like streets, like city streets, right?
Mhm.
If you're driving a car in Manhattan, that is a problem which, okay, you make a lot of money if you can do that without a human driver, right? But that's also the most difficult. On the contrary, like driving a car on the highway, self-driving, they've been doing it since the 1990s, believe it or not.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot of money there, right? And so the whole industry is trying to find that balance. So, like, the last thing I would say on that is, I personally believe it's going to be 5 years before you see a serious project of self-driving cars, which are actually commercially viable and commercially, you know, driving around people.
That makes sense. Five, maybe even 10 years if things slow down.
Yep.
But with things like COVID, for example, there was a lot of industries like Zoom and online education and remote working. All of those exponentially accelerated because of this pandemic. But it is interesting that what is going to be the alternative, either good or bad, catalyst for those fields. So what is going to be the call to action for these fields to actually accelerate and make it happen? Kind of like the space race of the 70s for the US, where there was a need to actually go into space because it was a competition between US and Russia and China and all these
Mhm.
different places. And they're like, okay, well, let's get everybody on board and do it. What can we be having a catalyst for that? Something that you actually mentioned though is interesting is that if a if an area is not profitable, then it's not necessarily going to make as much of a progress. And so I'm asking that then, how can we make an impact then with climate change? Because that's something that you were mentioning before the show.
Mm.
Because if it's not profitable right away, but it is
Mhm.
important, there's kind of a dissonance there.
Yeah, and I think so. Profit is, I think, a term that instead of profit, I would say sustainable. And the reason I would say is if it's something that you have to engage in commerce,
Mm-hmm.
right? And sustainability simply means that you have to engage in commerce so that it kind of grows without you having to push it, right? And so one way to do that is, for example, this is one example where I know this company that is trying to restore fishing communities because it makes it much more easy for these low-income neighborhoods in these in these countries to be able to feed their families with a nutritionally balanced diet,
Mhm.
right? So by working with these communities to fix their own water bodies, they can help them get something that they want, like which is a good meal for their kids.
Mhm.
And so that's an example of making something profitable at the same time as helping the environment, helping climate change. Uh, and there's like a lot of people who are working on, and by the way, like the price of solar is going down, quickly enough that a lot of people are moving away from coal,
Mhm.
which is great, right? Which is like exactly what you want. A person working in a coal mine would much rather be working on a solar field,
Yeah.
right? And so it's a win-win for one, the person who is working in the coal mine, number one. And then it's a win-win for everyone because it's cheaper, first of all, it is greener, and there's more solar energy than there is coal on the planet, right?
Mhm.
So it's always about finding a way where you can benefit people who would, switch to a different side.
Mhm.
Uh, and one more thing is, for example, Impossible Burger, like Impossible Meat. Have you heard of that one?
Yeah.
Probably have, right? Beyond Burger, Impossible
I
Burger.
mean, I literally have a Burger King around the corner that has to offer it. Impossible Burger.
Oh yeah, yeah. Um, so the guy who made it, he was like the the one big factor that the biggest denominator that's actually making climate change accelerate fast is animal agriculture. And so he was like, what can I do? Like you could go like, oh, I'm gonna hug trees and I'm gonna prevent them from chopping down stuff, and like that's one way to go about the activism route, right?
Mhm.
And then the other route is, why are people, what is the behavior that is driving this damage to the environment? What would it take to change that behavior from first principles? So okay, the behavior is people like meat, right? You can't argue with it. You like meat. You could say like, oh, you're killing animals, whatever. A few people like meat, and it is what it is, right?
Mhm.
And so if you want to change, so with that behavior, if you want to change the behavior of eating meat, what if you could say, okay, let's make meat from plants? Because okay, actually all meat is made from plants in a,
Roundabout way.
through
Yeah.
yeah, roundabout way. You have a chemical reaction going on and stuff, and you have a cow which is like a lab, so to speak, for this change to occur. And so how can you take that out of the cow and do it in a factory like brewing beer,
Mhm.
and people get the same result. And so you simply change the economics so that you're making profit, or even if you're not making profit, it's actually sustainable for the market as a whole, right? And so that's how I think about profitability. You have to solve a problem by giving an alternative that doesn't require people to fight against their own willpower, or something that's proven to not work.
Yeah. It is interesting too, because if you look at like the sustainable development goals too, there's a lot of them when it comes to energy or education or just various aspects of health, and a lot of people use those as their motivations for starting companies and trying to find what areas they could be profitable in. And I think one of the bigger ones is education too. And you and I both are trying to work on that, and you in particular making some progress with that. And so, considering your company, where do you see the future of education? Considering that's one of the changes that people can make when it comes to climate in general too. That's a loaded question. I get that, but
I
what where
think
where, where do you see the future of it?
I think about time for the age of craftsmen to come back again. And by that, what I mean is that after the Industrial Revolution, a lot of the education, the training was to help people have a so-called, or well-rounded approach, so you can be given any job and like do whatever.
Hmm.
I actually don't even know now exactly what the purpose of that education was. You're supposed to, somehow
To be a
become,
cog in a wheel, basically.
yeah, whatever, and Seth Godin describes it really well. It this, this kind of job, he says, is about watching over the dog that bites the pilot if he messes with the autopilot. uh, but never mind. So I think having a craftsman mindset is about getting really good at a certain craft,
Hmm.
getting really good at a certain few things, whether it's five things or two things or whatever that somebody finds valuable, and pursuing mastery of things that nobody else can do except for you. And I think it's also captured in the book Deep Work, which I maybe some of your audience have definitely
Yeah,
heard about.
we love now
Uh,
Cal Newport.
Yeah, yeah. So the idea is that you want to be doing work that cannot be automated easily, given the era that you live in, the work that cannot be automated by a machine or by anybody else. You can add your own unique value, bring that your own unique value to that work, and make a career by solving a problem. And again, engaging in commerce at a very basic, bare bones level instead of indirectly through a really complicated corporate web.
Stealing a question from your site, what is systems engineering all about?
Systems engineering is an engineering methodology that is used for building very complicated, large scale projects where if it goes wrong,
Hmm.
the costs are enormous. And so it's like space shuttles, airplanes, naval ships, long range missiles, you name it, right? It's really our life support systems for in hospitals, whatever. It's about safety critical or financially really critical systems. And so the key to so systems engineering is a set of principles and tools and methodologies that you can employ as engineers from whichever field you come from
Hmm.
on how to go about designing and building these systems in a way that is most likely to lead to a successful project with the staying within budget and within your timelines. So it's not really an engineering discipline itself. It's more of the way you go about, the way you
Sys-
think about engineering.
Systems thinking.
Yeah, systems thinking. Systems thinking is part of it. There's also people management and how do you, deploy resources towards a certain end.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because it's often how I see some of the project management roles too, where you have to be
Yep.
able to manage the whole project as a whole, but also the people within it. And something I wanted to mention to you earlier actually is that what I want to do actually down the future, something I envision myself becoming is a smart city developer, someone who is in
Mhm.
that kind of systems role where I don't need to be an expert in agriculture or building the sustainable energy infrastructure per se. I
Mhm.
need to be able to help people organize it all and get things accomplished. That's what I wanted to do.
Mhm.
So that's one reason why I asked that question too. It's like that's my motivation behind it. What do you
Yeah,
think?
that's exactly the kind of moonshot project that system engineering was made for. It was actually developed in NASA and Lockheed Martin and these companies. It matured as a discipline in these organizations, which were going after the really huge projects, right? Like putting
Yeah.
a man on the moon, putting a man on space, Mars rovers, whatnot. So that's where actually most of the systems engineering work actually is still happening. But recently, you've also been seeing it in the self-driving cars industry. You know, a lot of the the SpaceX sort of uh, space as well. And so, but yes, smart cities of the future definitely is a system engineering problem.
That's interesting too. So I'll have to do more research into that. That's probably the next area I need to learn more about.
Uh,
Uh, but it's interesting too because you're also creating all this different content, a lot of different areas, a lot of technical aspects. And something you mentioned earlier is that you're writing a book. Considering your history with the blog and the Codex, I'm sure it's going to be interesting. But can you tell us more about what the book's going to be on?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm actually still figuring out the exact purpose of the
Mhm.
book. Depending on how well I can do with different things that I want to do with the book. But the main goal is again a guide for non-technical executives and entrepreneurs in the 21st century, or at least for this decade,
Mhm.
on how they can navigate and getting how they can get to a certain level of technical fluency, helping them learn the basics of how all digital technology works, and giving them some thinking tools for how to work with engineers better, how to build, how to avoid being disrupted in your own little niche, right? And so it's like a playbook as well as a textbook
Mhm.
for non-technical innovators.
That's interesting then too. What so if that's what your intention is to do in the next year or so, you have a pretty
Mhm.
wide background in work and education and your own projects that you're doing. So what is it that you really want to do? What is like your ikigai? What is the like for me, this is smart city stuff. What is yours?
Yeah, so I started actually with making a bucket list of like I think 8 to 10 different projects that I want to be working on in this life. And they may not be successful, not
Mhm.
all of them may make me money, but I want to be able to check them off the list like, okay, I spent my time and my effort on building this thing
Yeah.
and having fun, right? And so one of them I've already done. It was a website called Dense Layers that I'll keep working on slowly and slowly, and maybe it will build up to a few active users over time. And right now, it's this education company. After this, I want to be doing. I want to also work in the film industry. So have been thinking about different business models that I could uh, you know exploit uh, in that domain. And this environmental stuff as well. I'm thinking of starting in future I'll definitely work on a sustainability company, like maybe doing something with algae, or again sustainable meat production or plant-based meats or whatever, right? Whatever
Right.
at that point is the technological landscape and the right business model. I just want to work on projects that I find interesting, one after the other.
Yeah. Keeping yourself busy all throughout your life. And I resonate with that. In fact, I created PolyInnovator, my personal brand here, to actually be the foundation for all the careers that I wanted to have in life, quite like what you're doing there,
Hmm.
where you're like, okay, what
Yeah.
do I want to do next, and next, and next? And so I consider them kind of like phases. So the first phase is this modular education platform that I'm making. For you, it's this book and this SANPRAM and that kind of thing. So kind of similar that way. And so
Yeah.
I guess maybe just think about like how can you do those phases and how can you create systems in Notion or Evernote in your case and like organize that. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I don't like. I personally think there's no such thing as a career.
Hmm.
There's only a life,
Yeah.
and so you can define your life as you want, and you can choose to do whatever you want because there are actually no rules, right? You could actually this like today you could be a fitness instructor and tomorrow you're building smart cities. Who cares, right?
How'd you know my life schedule? Yeah, but no, that's interesting though because a lot of times people think they have to have just one job or one career. But even if you work for the same company for most of your life, you're still going to have multiple careers within that company. You're still changing,
Yep.
you're still evolving, and that's one reason why I think a lot of people are more polymathic than they realize too. So this has been
Mhm.
great. Where can people find you online?
Sure. So I would recommend you go to sanpram.com and read the first essay linked on the homepage itself. It's called the Non-Engineer's Ultimate Guide to Software Technology, and even if you have no background in software, it's going to get you to a minimum level of technical fluency within like half an hour. So
Yeah, it's a good article.
I thank you so much. Yeah. I hope if you're listening, I hope you find it useful.
Yeah, and I'll make sure I have links for you in the description, of course, but it's a nice verbal confirmation for people listening in. Once again, this is Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator, and this was Aman Agarwal on the Polymath Podcast. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, man. I had fun.
Yeah.